My name is Ashley Ellington, and I'm the Education and Outreach Specialist here at Gladney. Just a couple of things before we get started. CEUs do take about 5 to 7 business days to get back to you. You will receive a pop-up when the training is over. You can fill this out for your CEUs or certificates of completion. If you do miss it, tomorrow you'll get the same information in your email, so you can look out for that as well. And we are going to work with the chat now that it's working. Please put any questions you have in the chat as we go through. I think Bill is going to try to unmute some of y'all, so we're going to test that out. So anyways, it is just Bill today. Unfortunately, Heather is sick, so you just got Bill today. Sorry, but he is wonderful. So, and Nancy made a really good comparison. She said you're going to learn today how to go from going to McDonald's to Chick-fil-A. So Bill's going to teach you how to be the Chick-fil-A. So anyways, Bill, you can take it from here.
Okay, great. Well, hello, everyone. Originally, like Ashley said, I was planning on doing this training with Heather, but she is at home sick, and she wishes she could be here, but it's just me. So I apologize. You're gonna have to hear my voice a lot. So hopefully this is worth your time. This is something that when we talk about service recovery, this is something that I, even though being in the field for probably 15 years before I learned about this and the importance of this. And so it's a really important topic. And hopefully you guys will find it enjoyable. Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen here. Hopefully you guys will be able to see that. I do a couple of things here as I share my screen, and then I bring up the chat again, because as soon as I share my screen, it disappears. And then let me get to our participants so I can see if any of you guys raise your hand. Okay, I think I got it figured out now. Okay, so can everyone see can I get I see the presentation here. Make sure everyone's on the same page. You guys ready? Okay, so thank you, Alicia. Please feel free to use the chat. This is pretty interactive. It's not a huge group, so we definitely have a little more interaction. If there's something you want to ask, you can. There's this little raise your hand function in Zoom. You can raise your hand, and I'll try to answer it, or you can add it to the chat. Ashley will be monitoring. So if there's anything that shows up, they can also kind of let me know what's happening. So I definitely want this to be worth your time. So let's talk about service recovery. We at Gladney have been kind of in the service recovery world for probably about 8 years now. Started an initiative probably at the time I joined Gladney, actually about 10 years ago, with the Disney Institute. And we had a lot of initiatives, and it was basically on how to provide better service to our clients. And one part of that initiative was talking about service recovery. And so it was something that Disney introduced to us. And we thought it was so important and thought, man, this is really powerful stuff, that we formed a team. At the time, it was what we called Dream Team, and we started talking about service recovery for Gladney, and what do we think that we could do to not only provide good service, but also recover clients when we lose them. Gladney believes that every client should receive the finest adoption experience, but sadly, we missed the mark. We had a survey that was done at the same time that we were working in our group, and we found out that 33% of clients who use Gladney were dissatisfied with their service at one point in their adoption journey. So if you think about, like, if you're a numbers person, 33% of people being dissatisfied at some point in the journey, that's a big number. And it's probably not something that we're going to put on our pamphlet. Hey, come to Gladney. 66% of you will be happy for most of your journey, right? Like that's a big number. And so what we realize is that we do have this thing which is called a service disruption. It is a real thing. And basically a service disruption is where something goes wrong. It basically is when what we think we're supposed to provide or what's provided isn't in line with what the client expects. But the problem is that it's actually kind of complicated. It's not just, so as we talk about service disruption, it's not that simple. I want you guys to look at this, and this is like a little matrix, and it's kind of confusing, but it's worth kind of pointing out a few things. The first one is let's say that Gladney is providing high quality service and we're doing a really good job. A lot of clients will be happy with the service, and that's, I'm starting on the far left and I'll work my way to the right. They're happy with the service, and basically they're happy, we're providing a good service. It's a very mutual enjoying process. I mean, there's some hiccups obviously, but you know, for the most part, we're hitting on the cylinders we need to be hitting on. There's also sometimes where Gladney or your, and I definitely want to make this more general for each of you, or your organization is doing what they are doing. They're hitting the mark. They're providing the service that they felt like, or that we said we were going to provide, but we still have a dissatisfied client. That one's a little tough because now we're actually doing what we're supposed to do, but the client is still unhappy. And so now you have what we would call a client who had unrealistic expectations, or the communication, you had a communication breakdown. That somehow maybe someone promised something that we couldn't deliver. We overpromised and underdelivered. And so we'll talk more about kind of how to manage these later, but there are clients who receive a good service. And for the most part, we're doing, you know, this is basically our service delivery. This is what we promised, and they're still frustrated with us. And those are clients who are receiving a good service. There are also clients who will receive a bad service. And we know that we have, sadly, I myself have provided bad service to clients. Maybe I've had a bad day. Maybe I'm not paying attention to details. Maybe I haven't addressed, you know, the right protocol for different things. And so we have provided a bad service. But surprisingly, there are some clients who are still satisfied with that, which is super weird, because you think like even the expectation, I guess, is so low that even when we don't respond in time and we don't have, you know, we're not really meeting their needs accurately or effectively, they are in a good place with us. And so those are the clients whose expectations were low enough. I guess maybe they heard that our agency wasn't that good, and so they just came in and said, this is not going to be enjoyable, but we'll get through it. Or maybe they're just people who always have low expectations, or maybe they're just super relaxed. And so as far as they're concerned, hey, this low service is fine. I have no problem with it. And we do have some of those. And we'll talk about what do we do with those clients. There's some clients who we have failed them, and they are not aware yet. We have provided a bad service, but they don't know that we've done this. Maybe we shared something we shouldn't have shared, or we did something we shouldn't have done, or we didn't provide the right service, but they're unaware. Those also, I'm going to talk about what we do with those clients. And then the last one, which is probably the most common, is, yeah, we screwed up. We did something wrong. The client knew about it and they're disappointed. That's the far right side. Our service was not at the level we expected. And the client's aware of it and they're frustrated. There was a service disruption. And so we're kind of in that position. So as you look at that, you can see how already there's so many different layers to this. And if I act at all like this is simple, you're going to have to forgive me, because this is not a simple process of how do we identify service disruptions? How do we, figure out where we kind of fall in this? Was it our fault? Was it not? And then how do we move forward? So a service disruption, basically the simple definition is a breakdown in the delivery to the service of the client. As I mentioned already, it can be real, which means we did mess up or we didn't provide the right service, or it could be perceived. We have been providing good service, but they feel like we did something that was against what we promised, or even ethics, or all the different, from, the smallest thing to the largest thing, that it was perceived. I'm about to introduce something to you that we learned from the Disney Institute, which is very, very important, is that we have something called external client, and we also have something called internal client. External clients are the clients that we serve as an organization. They are basically what we would normally call our clients. These are for Gladney, these would be birth mothers, adoptees, adoptive parents, our volunteers, interns. These would be external. Internal is our staff, right? Our people who are on the inside. I guess volunteers and interns could sort of be internal, depending on how connected they are, if they're in the office every day or not, but they're basically internal. And when we talk about service disruptions, the reality is service disruptions occur across all parts of the organization. They can occur with external clients, but they can also occur with internal clients. As a manager now, or director for 10 years, I may be on the phone with an external client, and I may have a service failure, a service disruption, or it could be that I have a service disruption with the way that I lead my team, my communication. I say something, I have a bad day, I treat them disrespectfully, I say something that's inappropriate. I try to make a funny joke, and then all of a sudden it didn't land right, and I'm like, okay, this is a problem. Like, I have now crossed the line, or I've offended somebody. And so this idea of service disruption in an organization occurs both at internal and external. And it's important to recognize that that one of the things that I want everyone to know is the importance of giving the name service disruption, to actually call it that. Like, we have a disruption, a service disruption here, that you actually claim it. A lot of times it's easier to talk about the external, and the internal we kind of ignore. Like, well, they get paid, and if it's a disruption or we didn't do something well, they just kind of have to suck it up. But we learned that that's actually not the most effective way. If I make a mistake and I'm not willing to do service recovery, if I'm not even willing to recognize that I accomplished a disruption, or that I did a disruption, how can I expect the staff that I supervise to do that? So I have to be a part of this. This idea of service disruption and acknowledging it has to occur throughout the organization. This is not a training just for frontline staff. This is a training really for all of us who are in leadership, or all of us who are making decisions every day. So, and like I said, a client may or may not recognize it. So we kind of went over that. The point is, they're upset, their expectations weren't being met. So let's dig in a little bit. It won't take too long, but let's dig in a little bit. I'm just gonna spend a little time into service disruptions and kind of how we conceptualize these. So we basically have created 3 levels of service disruption here at Gladney, and I think these are pretty standard and pretty standard to how service disruptions are viewed across different agencies who have a service recovery model. So we kind of have like what we call the green and the yellow and the red. So the green would be the simple service disruptions that occur all the time. It's a common mistake. You potentially called the client the wrong name, and they have to correct you, or the pronunciation of the name. You made a comment that it seemed like it didn't land right. So then all of a sudden now you realize, like, okay, there's something wrong here. Let's go there. There's a little bit of this could be a typo. This could be, sending the email to the wrong person. We have a few Heathers, we have a few Ashleys here. I sent it to the wrong person, wrong Ashley, and hopefully it wasn't confidential information, but I sent it to the wrong person, and all of a sudden, like, I have these little service disruptions that are occurring all the time. So, if you think about it, every single one of us do these. It occurs all the time. It's very common, and those would be considered the green service disruptions. Then we get into the yellow ones, and the yellow ones are sort of the moderate service disruptions. These are the situations where usually, from our standpoint, middle management needs to get involved. This would be if we have a really angry, a lot of times with my team, if there's somebody on the phone who's yelling or cussing at one of my staff, if there's someone who is being belligerent, if there's a lot of disrespect, then I sort of have told them, like, this is where I need to step in. Like, you don't need to try to handle that on your own. This is my opportunity to sort of step in and say, hey, as a manager, can you tell me what's going on? These are totally different depending on what organization you work in, depending on what your role is. This would be something like, where maybe you were upset and you were disrespectful to one of your clients, or they felt like you were being manipulative, or you had a service disruption where there was an expectation that something was going to happen in a certain time frame, and now that time frame has been extended, more than just a couple of days, like we're talking a few weeks or even months. When there was a mistake in a home study, and now the family has to go and do a whole nother report. These are pretty significant and what we call yellow. They're moderate, they're significant, and this is where middle management usually steps in. And then you have the red service disruptions, and it's important that we talk about this because the red requires a kind of a different process of service recovery. But the red is basically where you are now talking about the CEO, maybe your attorney. We're talking about a pretty significant complaint of the organization, and those are obviously, if you shared confidential information, you've have a complaint that there was something unethical. This is where ethics would come in. If you did an unethical activity, someone falsified information, somebody said they were going to do something and they didn't, and now there's consequences to this, or the money that was supposed to be spent a certain way was not. In these situations, these are what we call our red service disruptions. That this is really significant. We're going to have to involve all the upper management, the executive team, or whatever it is the high-end team at your organization. You're going to have to include them. And so the important thing is to realize, like, each of these levels, that not every service disruption is the same. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how do you manage each of these levels, because there's a little bit of difference in how you do this. So these are kind of the level of service disruptions. Okay, so now I want we're going to have our first activity. So what we're going to try to do is you're going to I want you to spend a few moments, and I want you to think about an organization that had a service disruption with you. This is a personal, like, I had a situation with this organization. It was a big deal. It was really frustrating. I was frustrated. I was mad. The service I was expecting. And I want you to raise your hand, because you're going to share it, kind of like the organization. This isn't about bashing organizations, but it is interesting because we've all had, I always say, when people say, like, Gladney's the finest adoption experience, I'm like, yeah, for a lot of people it is, but for some people it's not. So just because you had a bad experience with one organization doesn't mean that other people will as well. But go ahead and think, and then if you're willing to raise your hand, I'd love for you to raise your hand, because I'm going to unmute you and I want you to share your experience. I just want 2 minutes. That's all. 2 minutes. Would anyone be willing to share a recent or significant service disruption? Okay, Natalie, you are quick. Okay, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Can you unmute yourself?
I'm here.
Okay, go ahead, Natalie. Share a recent service disruption.
Yeah. So recently, my dentist retired and sold his practice to a new dentist. And I had like a dental issue, in Winton, and the front desk staff just were not kind or friendly. And the new dentist kind of dismissed an issue that was happening, and gave me sort of a temporary fix, I guess you would say. And then I ended up having a dental emergency, and the dentist was out of town, and the front desk staff still was not helpful, didn't give someone else to contact, wasn't empathetic or kind. So I actually ended up just quitting with that practice and finding somebody different.
How did it make you feel?
I felt angry and also like desperate just because I was having an emergency and didn't know who to go to or what to do. Yeah, so a mix of that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I see another hand. Alicia, Alyssa. Oh, I'm not even gonna try. I'm so bad at it. Alicia.
Yes, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Oddly enough, it's a dentist experience also.
Okay.
Dental companies aren't regulated like doctors' offices and different things are. So that could be part of it. At the beginning of COVID was having trouble with our dentist. They were not scheduling appointments for preventative maintenance, cleanings, etc. And when we were finally able to schedule one, they did not provide the service despite scheduling for that service. So they had canceled multiple appointments on us despite known issues that did require preventative maintenance on an ongoing basis. Didn't provide the service, billed our insurance for the service, although they didn't provide it. And then we're just very poor customer service throughout. So I made a complaint to the Better Business Bureau about them. Was contacted by the, I guess, headquarters of this dental practice and was treated very rudely. And they essentially did not care that I did not have a good experience and that the service provided was not good. So similar to previous.
Yeah, to Natalie.
And to Natalie, I felt very frustrated, angry, especially because I knew that I had the option to go somewhere else. And that I had the option and the knowledge to advocate for myself, but other people didn't. And I felt like they were taking advantage of people, just trying to bring people in for the most expensive services and neglecting the services that actually would benefit people. So I was angry for myself, but for everybody else also.
Yeah. And I just having this conversation reminds me of all my like we went when COVID first happened, we went to an urgent care when my youngest son was sick, and we were going to give him a test. Well, this urgent care would require you to go through the ER to get a test. This was real early on, and the ER visit's $500. So we sat in the office, and when they finally told us that it's going to be $500, I'm like, I'm not paying $500 for a test. So I left. Well, sure enough, a month later, I get a bill in the mail for $500. And they had asked for my information, said, I'm not, like, I'll give it to you. They said, no, we promise we won't get billed. And I remember I had to fight that bill. I called them so many different times, and they said, we'll fix it. And they never did. And finally, I went to the office, to the urgent care, and I said, I need to talk to the manager. And I said, you guys are committing fraud because you're charging bills that weren't for services that weren't rendered. And so once I started using the word medical fraud, all of a sudden now I got a call from like somebody who was like, we'll fix this. But it was exhausting. It's so exhausting and frustrating. Anyone else? Any other hands? We have a little bit of time. I'd love to hear. I know there's more. Anyone else? I'm looking. Oh, I see it. Okay, there's a hand. Lauren. Okay, hold on. Go ahead, Lauren. Can you talk?
Yeah.
Yeah. I can hear you.
No, my husband and I in June were supposed to go to New York just for a weekend getaway that we've been planning for months. And we get to the airport, we put our bags through, and we're waiting, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, your flight's canceled, which we're like, well, that's a bummer. But they couldn't get us on a flight the rest of the weekend, and so they just canceled it and wouldn't return our money. And then our bags made it to New York, and we got those a week later. So and it was like they didn't care at all. They didn't care at all that A, our trip was canceled, and B, they had no, I feel like normally big businesses like that are kind of falling all over themselves, but they did not. So
is it American Airlines? Because that's one of my big service disruptions.
Yep, it was.
Yeah. I love American Airlines. I do. I'd prefer to fly them. But, when they have service disruptions, I was flying home from Colombia. I'd gone there to visit. I did a training in Colombia, and I was flying back. And basically, our plane was supposed to leave at midnight. And we were past customs. We're in the lobby or in the waiting area to get on. And the time just keeps going, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. And around 3 a.m., all of a sudden it jumped to the flight was going to leave at 2 p.m. the next day. So basically what had happened was the pilots all timed out, that they were flying from Dallas to Columbia. They left so late that the pilots couldn't turn around, or the new pilots, I don't know what. So basically we're inside customs, and we're stuck there. Luckily there was a lady that was walking by, and I'm like, what do we do? So she actually helped a few of us, not all of us, mind you, get back out of customs. And then we went back to the counter, and they wouldn't give us hotels. They treat us like we didn't matter. It was so frustrating. And finally, around 4 a.m, we all decided, a bunch of us who were Americans just jumped in a taxi and went and found a hotel, because we basically couldn't do anything till 2 o'clock the next day. But it was very, very frustrating. So for those of you who didn't raise your hand, can you at least put in maybe some names of some organizations that have pretty negative service, that have pretty significant service disruptions, like things that you associate, like when you go here, you're going to get a kind of a service disruption. Okay, Dunkin' Donuts, Spirit, AT&T, yeah, Spirit, yeah, dentist, okay, DMV, yep, cable providers, yeah, cable companies, yep. A specific regional hospital, okay, that's pretty funny. They're in Conroe. Insurance, okay, yeah. So we have Azle Hospital. Okay, I love this. Yeah, the medical community. Yeah, I love that you guys have like specific. The doctor on 7th Street. Yes, sure. Oh yeah. I mean, DFPS too. I mean, all of it. You know, have these what's the word I would use? Like the connection of service disruptions. You know, I think we can add things like Walmart and, you know, anything that's sort of, you know, some restaurants that don't seem to really care about quality. I know everyone loves Little Caesars, but that place always is kind of, you know, sometimes you may get sick from it. You know, those are the things that we have. So I think you guys all understand service disruptions. And if you haven't gone through a training like this, you may not actually recognize them that often, because remember, there's those people who got a bad service, but they don't really recognize it. So going through this training is going to make you see service differently. You know, I thought my frustration with what happened to me in Colombia with American Airlines was a big deal, but man, over the last 3 months, my stories are nothing compared to what's occurred. Kind of like what Lauren talked about, that these service disruptions are happening so much more, especially since COVID too. I mean, so many service disruptions occurred across the board, pretty much in every sector of you know, our community. So I think we have a good understanding of what they are. Hold on a second, let me go over here. Okay, so dissatisfied clients, here's one of the things that I think is also important for us to learn more on a personal level as we sort of bring it back to our own organization. Dissatisfied clients have a cost. Horst Schulz, the CEO of Capella Hotel, said that dissatisfied clients become organizational terrorists. And so for clients who are angry, their anger and frustration basically moves into a negative connotation, a negative association with an organization. And because of that, now a dissatisfied client may give you a bad review, may talk bad about you to their friends, may not recommend you to anyone. Dissatisfaction with an organization has consequences. And the consequences at the end of the day usually are financial. That basically, when someone's angry and they stop using them, like American Airlines kind of has a monopoly. So, you know, is Lauren not going to use American Airlines? You know, most likely she'll continue to do that. But there is still like now a second thought of like, do I really need to? Do I have to? Is that really what I want to do? There was a hotel group that said that one dissatisfied client can actually cost them $6,000. They actually quantified how much it costs. When we were in Disney, and the reason why is because you have the lack of use, the influence on other Also the marketing costs to replace that customer. When we went to Disney, they said that a dissatisfied client can actually cost them $30,000 because Disney wants you not to only come once, they want you to return. And every Disney week-long visit is about a $10,000 fee or revenue for them. So if they have a client who has a bad experience, it's not like they have lost just one visit, they have lost multiple visits. And so that's a really big number. At Gladney, we would have we would definitely have some costs associated with dissatisfied clients. The potential for client loss, people who wouldn't return to Gladney, people who wouldn't recommend Gladney. And so service disruptions definitely impact our business. And it's not just about an unhappy customer. At the end of the day, it's that they're not willing to invest, donate, be a part of us because they feel like, well, why would I if I have such a bad association with that? So what's the answer? Well, it's service recovery. Service recovery is the concept or idea that when something goes wrong, we're going to have a planned out response. It is basically saying that we, first of all, are going to recognize service disruptions. We're going to determine which ones, what level are they? And then at that point, once we determine that there's a service disruption, then the answer to service disruption is service recovery. So let's talk about service recovery models. So service recovery model is an intentional model that is created to help all the employees provide service recovery in a similar manner. Before we went through this process, I know for a fact that Gladney had done service recovery, right? Anytime there was an angry client, there was a frustrated client, I guarantee you Gladney had responses. But the truth of the matter is that depending on who you spoke to or who was in charge or which caseworker it was, the service recovery model would look very different across the board. And that's the exact same way that it would be across different organizations, that, maybe there is someone who's good at service recovery, but maybe there's someone who isn't. And so there would be no continuity on the service recovery for that client in an organization. So you may get someone who responds to service disruptions and other people who don't. So a service recovery model is a model that's created so that everyone in the organization uses the same model. And the concept or idea of where this came from was Disney. But because they have a service recovery model. But then when we did more research as a team, we figured out that there's a lot of organizations that have service recovery models. That this is part of the onboarding process. When you hire somebody, is you teach them, okay, when there's a service disruption, here's how you manage that. So Disney, we learned at Cook's Children, which is a large hospital here. I think most of you guys are probably from Texas on this, but if you're not, it is a large children's hospital here in Fort Worth area. And now they're kind of growing throughout North Texas. Google, the Ritz-Carlton, so many organizations, those were just a few that we found have service recovery models. And this model is something that is not only done by frontline staff, but is also expected to be done by upper management, by executives, even by the CEO, that the service recovery model is something that is a part of the DNA of the organization. It is designed both for internal and external staff. It is not that we provide that the model is designed to only be done with external staff, but the model is also to be done with internal staff. That if there's a service disruption in internal staff, then service recovery is the answer for internal staff as well. And one of the things about the service recovery model, which we hate because there's always crunch numbers and budgets and stuff like that. Every service recovery model has some costs associated with it. And we'll talk more about what that means. But basically, as you recover a client, there's always a potential that you may need to provide something, refund something, waive something, create a service, add something on. There's almost a financial response to service recovery models. And we found that across the board in all the service recovery models. So if there's any accountants on here, that kind of makes your hair go up a little bit. But the truth of the matter is, it takes insight to realize that a small investment at this point will avoid a significant loss at a later point. So that's the counterintuitive side as to why we may use some of our money now to help cover something, even though in the long run, you could probably say, well, why did we use this money? Well, it's because you have to realize that there were costs associated with the service disruption. And I think that is the language that communicates throughout the whole organization as we talk about, costs and fees and all these things, is that this is quantifiable. This is not just some, theoretical concept. This is quantifiable of actually loss of money from service disruptions. So service recovery models, basically, it's not my fault, but it is my problem. One of the things that we know about service recovery models is it's not just, well, I didn't do that. That was someone else in the organization. It's if someone's upset, then we all are able and should be capable of providing service recovery. Each of us should know how to do this. It doesn't matter. I work in post-adoption, and so most of the service disruptions occurred long before I got here. In fact, the majority of them did. Some of these occurred before I was born. And so as I do service recovery, there's an easy way for me to say, yeah, I'm real sorry, I didn't do that. So I don't know, that person's long gone. So I guess at this point, there's nothing we can do. Well, that's really not how this works. That service recovery, I take on part of that service recovery process as I assess and help and work through the service disruptions that occurred, even if they were 50 years ago. I take responsibility to help, and anyone in my organization should be able to take on responsibility to try to help and do service recovery with anybody. If you hear the problem, you now own it. So that is a different way of viewing this, especially for those of us who are more defensive and we don't like taking blame for anything. This concept is a little bit counterintuitive to our nature, and we'll talk more about that, but that is something to think about. So, you know what? We're talking about it right now. Why is service recovery hard? Okay, so let's do a little quick activity. Tell me in the chat, we don't have to raise our hand or talk, but tell me why service recovery is hard. What makes this difficult, or why is this something that maybe some people have a hard time doing? You don't like to hear how we have failed? Okay, yeah, we don't like to work with people who are angry or upset. We're afraid that if we acknowledge something that there's liability. Sometimes our feelings get hurt. It's vulnerable that you may open yourself to liability. There's emotions involved, absolutely, okay? Uncomfortable to receive feedback, correct? Sometimes we're not empowered by management to fix the issue. So sometimes we're helpless. And so it's like, why should I even try to address this if there's nothing I can do? Yeah, fear that if you try to fix it, it may not be accepted. We're defensive, we're avoidant, absolutely. So as we think about service recovery, I cannot tell you enough that I absolutely believe that when we make a mistake, our culture, most of our upbringings, that there's a very strong sense of shame, and the shame creates a kind of a stress response. And based on our stress response and how we normally deal with stress, our response will usually be, to Natalie's point, avoidant, which is sort of like, I'm going to try to get away from this problem, or defensive, I'm going to fight the problem. Most of the time, those are our natural inclinations when we have done something bad, we have done something stupid, we've made a mistake, we've said something. Most of the time, we either want to pull away or we want to double down. And so this is why service recovery is really, really hard, is because part of our neurochemistry, especially when you start talking about our limbic system and the way that it self-deflects and protects and uses a lot of mental games to try to protect our sense of self. If we are insecure generally, or we work in an organization where if we make a mistake, there's no security, it's really tricky to acknowledge that you've made a mistake. The reality is most of us would love for our mistakes to be hidden or not revealed. We would love for the problems that are occurring to just go away. Or we get mad. I've seen a lot of times where when someone is being confronted on something, they get really angry and they kind of put up that, get away from me. How dare you talk about this? Or they become victims, right? They go into the victim mode of, well, the reason that happened is because I didn't have enough resources, or da 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 da, or you put me in this. And all of a sudden they just start pointing fingers at everybody, which is part of that avoidance. And so service recovery is difficult because in some ways we have to acknowledge and sort of sit in the discomfort of our mistake. And that sucks. That's hard. And I've been in the field 25 years. And even now, when I make a mistake, my initial response is to want to hide it or to get defensive. And I don't think that at any point will there come a time where my initial response will be, oh, you know what, I messed up again. Let me do service recovery. Like this has to be very intentional. Service recovery has to be very intentional because it will never be natural. In fact, it will all actually feel counterintuitive. It will feel counterintuitive to first acknowledge that there was a service disruption and then to go back and say, let me address this. Let me try to fix this. Let me work to do this. But for those of us who have been working on this, what you will find is that there's a lot of power in service recovery. In fact, there's a lot more power than I ever imagined with service recovery, because although we feel like we may be picking up liability, the reality is that not addressing it actually probably increases the liability, or getting angry increases the liability. So this is where it becomes counterintuitive, but it actually makes sense that as we acknowledge something that maybe didn't work out right or that we didn't do well, we actually decrease our liability by not just acknowledging and said, yeah, we screwed up, but then by also moving into service recovery, which is the process by where we repair the relationship. And that is a whole, and I promise you, there are so many organizations that are not willing to do this. They're, for whatever reason, their leadership has decided, we're not going to apologize. We're not taking on any liability. We'll fight this. And sadly, those of us like, traveling American Airlines or buying a car or going to the dentist, at that point, we just have nothing else to say, but okay, I guess I just won't use your organization anymore. But then also the increase of liability increases for them. So there is some part of this that actually decreases liability. So service disruptions followed by service recovery actually repair relationships. And what the research talked about, and what we learned through this whole process, is that actually service recovery is very effective with dissatisfied clients. That there is a process by which you can actually return a client who is dissatisfied to satisfaction through service recovery. And what's really fascinating about this is there's actually research, and part of this comes from the Disney Institute, that if you don't have any service issues with us, then you'll walk away satisfied client. But if you have an issue and we resolve your issue and we resolve it to a point that we actually recovered you, your, what's the word I would say? Your commitment to us and your relationship to us is actually stronger than it would be if we hadn't made a mistake. So I want to say it again. If I don't make a mistake, I have a client who is satisfied with the service. But if I make a mistake and I fix it, now that client actually has a stronger relationship with us. And so the process of service recovery is that we actually can not only repair, but we can actually further deepen our relationship with our clients. Dr. Cross from TCU says it's better to err and repair than to have never to have erred at all. So the fact that we make mistakes, first of all, is absolutely, hopefully avoidable, but sometimes it just occurs. And when we do, and we repair that, and we reach out and we do service recovery, we actually can deepen and strengthen the relationship with that individual. So that now, not only are they not going to sue us or get frustrated or talk bad about us, now they're going to talk about how great of an organization they were, not because we did everything right, but because we were willing to acknowledge where we failed, and we're willing to do service recovery with those individuals and deepen that relationship. So if we make a mistake and you repair it, it actually deepens the impact on that customer. So I'm going to share real quickly our service recovery model. This is just Gladney's. I know a lot of you are not Gladney, but this is just so you can look at it. This is literally very, very similar to what Disney uses. Very similar. Most of these, are really like almost identical. They just use a few different letters, but it's really the same. So we have what's called the learn model. The first one is that we listen. One of the things that you have, always need to pay attention to is the emotion behind the tone. And sometimes when you're talking, a lot of times with clients, we're talking more about logistical stuff or data points or stuff like that. But you may hear something behind, or you may sense it. That's a really good time to say, is everything okay? Is there something that's happened? I sense that you're angry with me. I sense that you're not willing to talk about this. And then at that point, then the first step is just to listen. This is hard. I think this is probably where the skill and the training comes in, where you have to learn how to listen first. This is usually where we will get defensive, or we'll shut down and just say, yeah, well, that happened because that person was out of town or whatever, and we won't listen. But when you begin to listen, if you're willing to take the risk and really listen, what happens is a lot of times their original complaint isn't their real complaint. That as you use listening skills, and actually including the next one of empathy, you actually begin to break through sort of the original complaint. And a lot of times it's something deeper that occurred. This was, very personal to me. If it was a personal issue, if it was a trigger, you begin to hear the client and where they're coming from. So that it's about learning and listening. And the more you listen, the more you learn. And a lot of times when I'm doing this, I'll be writing all this down. So I'll try to because that way I can kind of make sense of it and say, okay, but wait, you said this, was that where it happened or not? And before you know it, you'll circle the wagons and say, so this is what's really just driving you nuts. And they'll say, yeah, it's this thing right here, the non-responsiveness. This is the fifth mistake. This person doesn't really seem to care about, what we're going through, whatever it is. And then you can begin to that. And then what you do, and you want to be able to do this in such a way that I can reply to you and say the same thing. So in Natalie's situation, I would say, so what I'm hearing you say is, and I'm going to summarize what really frustrated her, that you had a dentist who didn't seem to really care. And then you kind of got some temporary work. But then when you really needed him, you saw for sure that he didn't care at all. And at that point, they were almost annoyed that you would come to them in an emergency. And so that really just made you feel helpless. It put you in a vulnerable position where you had a tooth that was broken. And then Natalie would say to me, yes, that's right. That's what it is. So I'm getting confirmation that what I've heard now, they're confirming to me, they're confirming to me that I heard them well. And that's why taking notes and just listening to them is important. The next thing that you do as you move through this is you apologize. This one's a little bit hard because like Emily Byford said, it takes on some liability. So we'll talk more about how apologies look. Sometimes it's so clear and evident that we messed up, and we'll just say, we're so sorry. You're absolutely right. That was a mistake. And there's nothing you can say about it. If it was an email that obviously has something like, if it's absolutely, if Natalie's going to send this to her dentist, that's right. If it's absolutely evident that this was a mistake, everyone knows it. We don't do anyone any favors. to just act like it didn't happen. So those are some of the things. If it's more gray, or if it's definitely not that we'd had a bad service, then the apology sounds more like, I'm so sorry, obviously you're disappointed with our service. I'm so sorry we didn't meet your expectations. I'm so sorry, I'm sorry that this happened. I know how frustrating it is to you. So there's different ways to do that. Though it's very important to figure out kind of what apology you want to make. One of the things you don't want to do, like if I'm hearing, complaints from 30 years ago, I have no idea. Although there's some notes, I have no idea what happened. So I could say, I wouldn't say like, oh, I'm so sorry, they just made, the biggest mistake. But I'm also going to say, well, I mean, I doubt that they did that incorrectly. I'm sure they did it correctly because I just don't know. And so I'm just going to say, I'm so sorry. I don't have enough information here, but this is kind of what I see. I recognize that that's not what your expectation was. So I'm learning how to do a little bit of a dance so that I'm not taking on liability for something that we don't need to take liability on, but I'm also acknowledging the dissatisfaction or the frustration. And so that's a little bit of the art of it. You'll have to learn how to do that and kind of determine. And part of it is determining, as you go back to that original matrix, like, did we really screw up or not? Did we make a mistake? And if we did, then okay, part of that is important to acknowledge. The next one is we respond. This is after we apologize. This is where the money comes in, where you may have to like waive something or cover something, or we may say, hey, we're gonna offer you this. In our world, it's a little hard with adoption because there's really not like smaller transactions, but it definitely can occur. I mean, there's definitely been times where we may be able to help somebody or waive something or go the extra mile and say, hey, we're going to send somebody out. We're going to eat the cost of this. We're going to send somebody out and we're going to fix this. And that's going to cost us money. It's going to cost us time, but because we messed up, we're going to do this. Or maybe, we're going to provide an add-on service just for this situation because, normally we don't do this, but in your case, we're going to do this. Those are some of those responses that we're working to help. One of the things that I always value are people who are willing to advocate for their client, to speak to power and say, hey, we messed up here. This was an issue. We need to fix this. I think one of the things that if we have any supervisors who are on this training, one of the things that you really, really have to be careful of is not shaming people when they make a mistake. Unless it's their fifth mistake doing the same thing, then you have more of a employee issue. But recognizing that some mistakes happen, I want to be gracious and forgiving in the same way that I would like to be met with grace and forgiveness. And so I have to demonstrate, that to the people I work with. And then after we respond, then the next one is note. And noting basically is I'm going to pay attention to what went wrong. Is there something in our process? This is very important because if it's a mistake that occurs because the process isn't working well, and then we don't fix the process, then that really is on us. Like we have to try to address it. Now, there's some things that are inevitable. We use systems like the mail and email, and sometimes just things don't work. But if there's something in here that says, maybe I have someone who's in a position that they're not very good at, and I'm trying to make them, I'm not a detail person. So if you put me in a detail-oriented job, I would not be successful. And so if I'm having to apologize multiple times because of my lack of detail, like I'm not in a position to be successful. So that's something that would be this response. That would be this note. I need to pay attention to this and maybe make some changes. Maybe I need to change the way something's done. Maybe I need to change the way that things are managed. Maybe I need to change the wording of this. Maybe I need to address this. We've had situations where we thought we were doing something really well, and all of a sudden we got wind that the whole, adoptee community was mad at us for this, or our birth mothers are so frustrated because we use this terminology wrong, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, okay, we have to learn from this. We have to pay attention to this, and we change, and we have to learn and alter it, and we're going to document it, and we're going to discuss it, and that's part of that process of adjusting. And sometimes it's simple, and it's like, hey, this was our process is good. This was just an oversight. Or you know what, this whole process, this was not done well. We need to change the way this is done. And the way that we get to the actual response and note is if we listen really well. You may be surprised how many times you're fixing problems that aren't the problem because we were too defensive, we were too avoidant of the issue, maybe we were afraid of the emotion. I've worked with families where they're complaining about the kid, and before you know it, I realized that it's a marriage issue. You know, like there's just so much complexity and so much layers to emotion and reasons for it. And there's so much history. And a lot of times if we're not able to listen, and don't get me wrong, sometimes people don't want to speak. Sometimes people don't want to be recovered, but the majority of people want to be recovered. And so us going back and doing this and providing this model is extremely powerful, extremely powerful. So let's jump back to, I'm gonna give you guys a chance to talk a little more in a second. So you're ready. Let's go back to our response. So I'm now going to add another layer. So you guys saw the first 3 lines here. Now I've added the last line. So, hey, we're providing a great service. The client's happy. Hey, great job. Like, keep doing what you're doing. Hey, we're providing a great service, but the client is dissatisfied. Well, part of what we need to do is manage our expectations. You know, you want to be careful that you're not over promising and under delivering. To me, that is a very quick way to just create service disruptions throughout, you know, your organization, that you say we're going to do this and then you don't deliver. It's really, really frustrating. And so part of this, and this is what our CEO calls as managing your audience, is making sure that we explain what our service is, that it's clear what we're able to do and what we're not able to do, that we recognize where we start and where we begin. And that can be challenging, especially for new social workers when you come in and your first time you've ever been on the line. I mean, you're just willing to do anything and everything for your clients because you care about them and you have all this energy. And without realizing it, you may be taking on too much. I'm a licensed counselor, but I always remind myself that I am a counselor. I am not the counselor. You know, that is there are so many other people who all have to be part of the community to serve our clients that I can't take it all on myself. And so part of me is recognizing what I'm able to do and what I'm not able to do, and making sure that I'm teaching my audience and that I'm explaining my expectations well. And if I failed at that, then I need to do service recovery. That service recovery will sound a little bit different. It won't be, I'm so sorry for this mistake. It will be, I'm so sorry that we didn't meet your expectations. I'm so sorry that we communicated this inaccurately, that we communicated as if we were able to provide this, when the reality is this isn't something that we're able to provide at this time. Those are some of the things that we would manage when we feel like we're doing a good job, but somehow they're still upset. That's how we would manage that. But what happens when we do mess up? We do have a low quality service. Well, even if we have a satisfied client and they're happy, and as far as they know, we're doing a great job, you still want to pay attention. So this is where surveys, listening to people, being willing to look at our services and to say, are we really doing a good job? You will have a lot of clients who will be happy with your mediocre work, right? But that doesn't mean you should still provide mediocre work. If there's some things that you want to look at and change, you know, definitely pay attention to that. But, you know, sometimes it's nice to have a client that has a little bit of lower expectations because you just feel like, okay, this is doable. They're not very common. Most people pick up on mistakes, but sometimes they don't. There also is the client that we have messed up and they're unaware. That's a hard phone call. I've had a few of those where I've had to pick up the phone and say, hey, we sent your information, we sent a letter to the wrong family, and now we can't find that letter. We put in the wrong information and now your process is going to be delayed. They weren't aware of it. They were not aware of it, and now we're making them aware of it. And immediately I go right into service recovery. I'm so sorry. You know, and what usually happens is they get about 2 days and then they call back. And then they've moved into, I'm not aware of it, but now I'm aware of it. Now they moved into the final column, which is, I'm mad, you guys messed up, And for those, obviously, that's where service recovery absolutely is the response. There, where we are basically going to acknowledge that we made a mistake, there was an oversight, that we missed this in the home study. You know, that maybe it's personal. I apologize for the way that joke came across. It wasn't. I apologize. That wasn't appropriate. I thought that would be funny, but really now I realize it wasn't. You know, or I should never have said that, or I think I came across rude, or I didn't manage that in the best way. And the service recovery process is us just acknowledging that. A little bit of an aside here. That is our response unless the service disruption is red. If the service disruption is red, then you need to be a little more cautious and allow your executive team and your like your CEO to manage that. There's been some situations where you know, it was pretty significant and maybe legal. There'll be some litigation. Sometimes, you know, litigation does occur, sadly, in our field, or someone is now threatening litigation. Those are the times where I'm just going to absolutely hand it off to our executive team and say, hey, like, here's the disruption, here's what occurred. A lot of times, you know, service recovery, apologizing, fixing it still works, but I'm not going to make that decision. This occurs obviously if there's malpractice in the hospitals and Cooks. It would occur if there was maybe there was a mistake in the delivery of services, or there was something that was done incorrectly, and now all of a sudden you have a lawyer calling you. Those are where you absolutely just want to involve not only your management, but you go ahead and involve your executive upper management, because there's obviously a higher component. So here, let me look over these. Breach of confidentiality, legal process, unethical practice, absolutely. Illegal activity, misuse of agency funds. These are the red ones where service recovery has to occur at the highest level. And service recovery may not even occur. It may be you know, some sort of a legal process that we won't be involved with. So that's kind of where it changes. When we get to the green and the yellow, service recovery absolutely is very appropriate. If it's big enough to involve your supervisor to let them know that this mistake occurred, I always think it's important for the supervisor to be a part of the apology, to let the staff know, hey, this has been elevated, this has been escalated to me, and now I'm responding. That makes people feel like that you really mean it, like you really acknowledge this and you want to make that you want to correct and resolve it. And then when you do it, you're going to use, you know, like the learn process. You're going to listen. The supervisor can do this as well. I do think the supervisors definitely can play a very supportive role to our frontline staff when it comes to service recovery, and not throwing anyone under the bus. Service recovery is not blaming somebody else, just acknowledging and processing this communication. So let's open it back up as we get closer to the end. We're not too far from the end, actually. It's went a little quicker. Can anyone think of an organization where there was a service recovery, or where there was a service disruption, and then they recovered you back, and like recovered you back pretty significantly? Can anyone think of that? And if so, would you raise your hand and share us? Now that I'm in service recovery mode, I've got a significant number of organizations that I'm like, they're good at service recovery. They're good at this. This is what happened. This is how they respond. This is what happened. Okay, Janet, hold on. Let me unmute you.
All right, can you hear me?
I can.
All right, I had some problems with actually the same hospital I talked about earlier, and then an organization getting some things done, and they weren't talking to each other, and it was just an absolute nightmare. I just kept calling the second organization, not the hospital. It took 1.5 years, but the hospital would not work with me, but the other organization, she went deep back into the files and found the information, and she solved the entire problem and went above and beyond because she really didn't have to go back as far
Yeah.
as she did. So,
How did you feel with the fact that she was able to do that she did that for you?
stunned, happy, thrilled,
Yeah.
just beyond belief that she did that. It was great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Anyone else? Come on. I know there's some good people out there who are good at service recovery. Who wants to raise their hand? Who wants some? Give me 2 more people and we'll be done. Okay. I see another hand. Hold on. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, it's a panelist. Okay. Hold on. Huh? Nancy?
Okay, so I'm going to share, this is minor compared to the hospital, but Mod Pizza is one of my favorite pizza places. And I do it with DoorDash when I'm working remotely. And I got from DoorDash my pizza, and it was cut in half and put in 2 separate boxes, and it was all wadded up. And then I had ordered, it's like they're ding dongs. They're so good. It's the no name cakes, but they're supposed to be like ding dongs. And they were this green cake that tasted like key lime, and they were not good. And so, you get a survey every time you order something. And so I filled out the survey, and they actually replied back to me. They apologized for the service. They, and gave me refunded my entire money, everything that I had spent. And then they gave me a free pizza on top of that. And so that's what I call great customer service.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay. Let's see, Natalie.
Similar, it's just like a restaurant. But I would say like Chipotle has the fastest recovery that I've seen. They have like a quick chat. Like it happens often that I don't get the correct order, like something will be missing or something's wrong. And you're able to do the chat, and like immediately they process like a coupon for you to use in the future towards something for free. But it's really fast and easy and works well. And I have to do it often, but because they do it quickly, I don't mind.
Yeah, they're on my short list, Natalie. Of I have a short list, and they're one of them. If you were to ask me, the 3, Chipotle's one of them.
Yeah.
Sometimes they, most of the orders now you pick up at the window, so you don't even see it being made.
Yes.
And you take it home, and all of a sudden you're there. So you put it in the app and say, hey, this was wrong, or it's so small. And they're like, hey, congratulations, you got a free burrito. And you're like, what? Like, that's crazy. How did that just happen?
Yeah. The robot.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, yeah, they obviously have it. Okay, Trader Joe's, Southwest Airlines, yes. One time they overbooked, and so they were giving everybody money. And I remember I was in college, and we all got on the plane, and there was one extra person standing in the aisle, and he's like, where's my seat? And they had put one too many people on. So I was in college, and I was like, I don't need to go. I said, I'll stay. I think I ended up staying in like Cleveland, Ohio. I was living in Baltimore, going back home. So I got off, and this guy got a seat, and they went on to Baltimore, and I spent the night. Southwest Airlines gave me like $600 for being willing to get off the plane. That's different than like not getting on the plane. Like I had to actually get off the plane, and they gave me $600, which bought me 4 tickets at that time. That was 4 tickets that they gave me. So yeah, Southwest Airlines. What other things? Anyone else want to say? And think about the experience you have when someone recovers you. When someone brings you back and says, we're so sorry, and acknowledges it. Sometimes that's all we have to hear. And sometimes that's all our clients have to hear is, we're so sorry that we did this, we messed up. A lot of our clients don't want to have a negative relationship with us. And so when they're hurt or upset, they have this emotion that they're carrying. And a lot of times they don't want to carry the emotion, but if we don't resolve it, they're just going to carry it, and it's going to play out through their whole experience. And so sometimes acknowledging it with emotions, when you name it, you tame it. So when you say, you're frustrated with me, you're angry, we get it. We understand that this was not what you expected. Then it's finally like, yeah, I am, and then almost always it's followed up with, but it's okay. I know these things happen, da, 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 da. And then we move back into this sort of like relationship again. And they feel heard, acknowledged. So, okay, hold on, Alicia, let me unmute you. I see that hand. See if it works. Oh, maybe that hand, I don't know why this time it's not working. Oh, there she goes. Okay. Oh, maybe she didn't mean to raise
I
her
got
hand.
you. Two
There you are.
questions here.
Okay.
One, what if a low level disruption is heightened? For instance, a client's upset that you don't provide a service, but that service is not something that you provide anyway, or you don't, it's not available to everybody, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And it is escalated to the CEO, to the media, et cetera,
Happens,
because this person is so upset.
all the time. I mean, it's funny how one of these things that is not that big of a deal, but if they know the CEO, I mean, at Gladney, we're not that big of an organization, so they can pick up the phone and call our CEO, and basically then he comes down and says, hey, I got this call from this thing. One of the things that I think is important is for there to be at least some communication. And don't get me wrong, we've been doing this for 10 years, but the reality is not everyone at Gladney is good at this. And not everyone does this, to be frank. I mean, this is something that, takes a little bit of investment. But we do have a good situation where a lot of times our CEO will listen, but won't, take sides. And a lot of times we'll say, well, let me look into that. Let me address that. A lot of it depends on if your boss is willing to sort of create a little bit of space for the conversation. And you definitely don't want to be a boss or a leader where basically you just say, well, I can't believe they did that, and throw someone under the bus, especially the frontline staff. But yeah, the escalation of small things, to them, it's not a small thing. It may be something very little, but it feels very big. The response hopefully is the same of apologizing. But yeah, no, we've dealt with that. And I think we've had some situations where it does hit the media and it does get much bigger. And to be honest with you, those times are hard. Those are difficult times because those responses, most of the time at our organization, if it's hit the media, then the executive team usually drafts some type of response. When I started, I was over our international program, and we had a lady who was in charge of intake for our Bulgaria program. And I feel like this lady promised the moon to all these families about how incredible this program was and how young the children would be when they're adopted and how few issues they were going to have. And yet later, of course, this person leaves the organization, and we now have a whole program of angry parents who are so frustrated because that individual told them that we provide a service that we didn't provide, and that we had a program, and that they were going to be potentially the child would be placed with that had very small needs, and that just wasn't the program. And so it happens a lot. And I don't have an easy answer to it. I know the answer is service recovery. But it does require the whole organization to try to work some in sync. Now, sometimes you're just gonna get thrown under the bus and you just have to suck it up and say, okay, I'll apologize, even though if I'm ever told to apologize, of course, by my CEO, I'm gonna apologize. But it's hard, it's tough.
Second question kind of dovetails into that.
Sure.
Is there a point after which you personally or the organization as a whole would stop service recovery efforts?
Absolutely.
If it just doesn't seem to be leading anywhere?
Yeah. So I would say you're getting into a little more clinical stuff. But I would say if you have a client who has a really strong personality disorder, and they're not in a potential place where they can actually be recovered, because part of it, that trauma is maintained. And especially with something that's serious, I don't know, whatever your service is, but if it's like adoption, that's such an intimate part. that it almost feels like it's never going to heal. And honestly, it makes sense. We have tried to recover, and it's only been a handful. We have tried to recover clients. We've paid for counseling. We've done everything we can. And what you realize is that there's not anything we can do. The expectation is that somehow we would, pay for counseling for the rest of their life. Well, we help our clients with some counseling fees, but we can't indefinitely forever do this. And so, we do have some clients, sadly, who don't seem to want to seek wholeness, to be made whole. And so that drama narrative continues, even though we're doing our best good faith effort to repair this. It does seem like we're unable to do that. And sadly, at that point, and that's at the executive level, that it's decided, okay, there's not much more we can do. And those people, sadly, will remain terrorists. I mean, you can go on Gladney, social media, and you'll see people. We can't say, when they say Gladney doesn't care, we can't say, actually, we spent $10,000 in counseling for you. Like, we can't defend ourselves. And so what we've found a lot of times is we just stay silent, and we just recognize that there will be people who are unhappy. And we do our best to, if there's opportunity for us to help them, we will, but there's not a lot more we can do. And that's tough. I recognize that, also recognize that there are some people who are just hurting. And so we are, for whatever reason, the narrative of their pain, we're the reason for their pain. Some of that, part of it may be accurate, part of it may not be accurate, but we have learned to say, hey, we can't do this. And sometimes litigation does involve, and litigation determines if what they're saying is true or not. So yeah, great question. Does that answer your question? Sounds like you have a specific case that you're thinking about.
No, that was very good. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And it's tragic. I think you want to try to do your best to recover. But sometimes the pain is too deep, and some people, it's hard to work through that. And I recognize that. Yeah. And this is not a fail safe. This is going to work with everybody. There are some people who do not want to be recovered, and there's nothing you can do to recover them. So, yeah. So, and that kind of goes into my next question. Oh, I know. Okay, so let's go back. That got kind of deep. I want to go back and have you guys write in, what are some of the places that you feel do a good job of service recovery? Because I think I saw a few. Okay, I got Trader Joe's, Southwest Airlines, Chick-fil-A. Okay, Southwest Airlines. Okay, who else? Give me some good ones. Walmart does a good job of service recovery. Okay, I want to apologize to Walmart. Aldi, Target. Oh my gosh, Target. Panera, Target. You want to know who does an incredible job? What I found? Costco. Man, I can take worn out shoes to Costco and be like, my son, and they'll be like, sure, we'll take them back. I'm so impressed with Costco. Uncle Julio's, Target. Okay, so what's really cool is that you guys, without even realizing it, are Nordstrom's. Yeah, absolutely. You guys are the customers, right? And yet, because of the service recovery model, you're literally telling us, like, this is a place that repairs relationships. Dr. Pepper, I've had good experiences with the Hilton Hotel. My parents always go to Hilton. And we went to a vacation in Puerto Rico about a week ago. It was about 3 weeks ago. And the food was super late. And the guy just said, hey, I'm gonna pay for all of this. He said, I'm gonna comp your whole meal. And like, I just thought, like, they didn't even ask. I didn't even have to complain. Like, they just did service recovery. Amazon Fresh, yes, they give you the refund. Every time your lettuce is bad, they don't even say anything. Amazon really does have a great service recovery. Like, it seems amazing that, if I go to a certain place and I'm trying to do a return, they just, I'm always nervous. But with Amazon, it's just like, we'll take it back. Hello Fresh. Okay, awesome. So this is great. This means that you guys are noticing, paying attention to the people who are good at this. And that is wonderful. obviously, the goal of all of this is that, if this was occurring somewhere else, that Gladney clients would say, Gladney did a good job in recovery, and that would be something that they would acknowledge that they would recognize for us. And that actually is what the survey found. So when we did the survey, if you look back, you go back and you said, we had all these people who went through our process and they did a survey. 33% of them were dissatisfied at some point in their process. But this is before we even did service recovery. 80% of the unsatisfied clients, so here's your statistics, right? So 80% of the unsatisfied clients now were recovered by an appropriate response. They were recovered so much that they would actually refer friends and family to Gladney. Isn't that crazy? At one point they said, there was a issue in my process, but because of an appropriate, now don't get me wrong, there's still 20% of the 33, right? So that's what, 6% not recoverable. But the rest of them, 27% were recovered to a point where they would refer Gladney to a friend. Isn't that cool? Yeah, it's fascinating to think that, this actually has a lot of credibility, and you can attach now finances and numbers, and, and this is the way for internal and external staff. Once let's say you have a service disruption with an internal staff, and whoever that person is doesn't repair it, well, that person now is a bill terrorist because I did a service disruption and I didn't fix it. Now they're all going to go and talk to all the other people about Bill and how he did this and he didn't apologize. One of the things that I've learned in my own working with my own team and the teams around it is, if I ever do anything that I'm like, oh, that was definitely a mistake, I should not have done that, I make it a point to go and try to do service recovery well long before HR ever gets involved. And then, this is super crazy, and I've had to learn how to do this, then I usually will go and tell HR, hey, I think I upset this person. Here's how I handled it. And most of the time, HR is like, okay, thanks for doing that. I appreciate you doing that. And, I haven't heard anything, but if I do, I will. Sometimes if I have someone who's really angry at me and I feel like I want to hide something because of something, a lot of times I may just copy my CEO on my apology. I'll blind copy him. So he knows, like, okay, I don't know what Bill screwed up, but he's apologizing to this person for screwing up. And just so that he's aware. One of the things it does is it reminds me that this is okay and that it's normal. It also takes away all the fear of, like, am I going to get in trouble? Those are some of the things that I've learned that kind of help me maintain my service recovery. And at the end of the day, if I make a mistake, and every time I make a mistake, my boss is just hounding me and giving me a hard time and making me feel more shameful, like, then I may decide, like, this isn't the right place for me because I'm not perfect. But what I have found is the majority of times when I just acknowledge these things and I move forward, I've gotten nothing. Even I really haven't had hardly any organization that I've worked in that this doesn't work. There's probably been a couple supervisors that were really insecure of mine, and so mistakes were very threatening to them. Not because it was like they were mad at me for not being perfect, but because they were insecure enough that they couldn't even really emotionally manage the mistake. And so then they would get angry and frustrated. But that has been a very small, most of the supervisors or the leaders that we work with, for the most part, if service recovery is done well and we're willing to do it, we'll have a good response to that. I would say that doing service recovery probably will create a better response from your leaders than becoming defensive or denying it or dismissing it. That usually is where, that's where you start getting into a position of, like, okay, this isn't good. And so I definitely feel like that. Let me take one moment to explain why this is so important. I feel like all of this lies at the heart of attachment. That when a client brings a need to us, a complaint, how we manage that complaint determines how trustworthy we are. That if they bring some to us and they dismiss it, or we dismiss it, or they bring some to us and we get angry and defensive, what that means is now their need has now been put to the side versus our need to look good, to act like we know what we're doing, to meet our goals, whatever it is. We have taken their need and minimized their need, and we have escalated our need. Well, what happens is the trust, we begin to lose trust because they say, I brought something to you and it wasn't handled well. Why would I feel like I can bring more stuff to you? Why do I feel like you're not going to, like, I don't feel like you're going to be honest with me, or you're not going to meet my need. But when they meet your need, especially if it's a complaint about you and you do your best, and I promise you, it's almost unfair that I do this training because I have people who have felt like I have done horrible work and horrible jobs. And there's people, and so I get that. Like, I understand I'm not a specialist when it comes to this stuff. But if I can try to hear what they're saying and I can actually like respond and meet their needs, what they feel like is, oh, he got me, he cared enough. And I begin to develop trust. Well, that's the exact same recipe for attachment, that a child brings to the parent the need and the parent meets the need. The child feels safe with the parent, and then this deeper relationship occurs. And so this is not just business. This is not just about numbers. This is about meeting our clients where they are. And it's easy to hear a complaint from one of my clients about somebody else, but it's harder to hear a complaint from one of my clients about me. But if I can somehow learn and secure myself enough to truly allow that and to go then and apologize, then all of a sudden what happens is I deepen my relationship with that individual. And that's really, really powerful. And you can't quantify that. That is, and then when the time comes where I need them to do something, or someone says something, now I have deepened my relationship with that person. And so for those of you who are in this, work environment, one of the things that I would definitely, ask of you, and in some ways, I encourage you to do, is to learn how to apologize. It is not easy. It is never easy. And we all have reasons as to why we don't want to do it, the vulnerability, the liability. But I will tell you that the more that you can embrace it and kind of understand that this will be part of your journey, and the deeper you can build relationships with people. And what's really, really cool is, to see it as well, work with other people as well. Like that, it happens with me that if I have a service disruption for myself, if someone comes and says, I'm so sorry, like that's just like soul food, right? Like it just fills me up, and it just makes me feel like, wow, that was really, they didn't have to do that. They could have just hidden behind their desk, but they chose to do that. So don't underestimate the value of this. This is so much more than just here. It really is kind of a journey down here. So that, my dear friends, is my training. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions, you can put it in the chat. Also raise your hand. I'd love to, if you have any questions. We got a couple minutes. I want to thank everyone for coming.